At 3:10 in the morning, my dad called me from the police station, his voice trembling and thick with blood. "Honey, they are framing me," he whispered. "Your sister-in-law beat me with a baseball bat. But she told the police I attacked her because I am mentally ill. Your brother just stood by and let it happen." When I walked into the precinct and the arresting officer tried to throw me out, he had absolutely no idea he was dealing with the senior legal counsel for the City Police Oversight Commission. I watched all the color drain from his face when I pulled out my badge. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from people who thought they were untouchable. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and I destroy false narratives for a living. I work as a corporate crisis and civil rights attorney in Atlanta, fighting the very systemic injustices that were currently unfolding inside that police precinct. The drive downtown took exactly 12 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles ached. My father, Jeremiah, is a retired pastor. He is a 65-year-old black man who spent his entire life building up our community in the historic Auburn Avenue district. He is gentle, proud, and has never raised his hand against a single soul. Yet here I was, racing through red lights, because the system was doing exactly what the system always does when a weeping white woman points a finger at a black man. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the precinct, and the scene hit me like a physical blow. The stark fluorescent lighting illuminated a reality I had fought against my entire career. My father was handcuffed to a metal bench in the corner, blood crusted over his left eyebrow, dripping down his cheek and staining the collar of his favorite Sunday shirt. He looked exhausted, holding his ribs shivering in the freezing air conditioning. No one was tending to his wounds. No paramedic was in sight. Instead, all the attention was focused on the center of the room. My sister-in-law, Chloe, sat wrapped in a thick thermal blanket, sobbing hysterically into the chest of my older brother, Jamal. Chloe was 30 years old, the daughter of a wealthy real estate tycoon, and she wielded her privilege like a loaded weapon. A white police officer was crouching beside her, offering her a cup of water and speaking in low, soothing tones. He was treating her like a fragile victim while my bleeding father was treated like a violent criminal. Jamal, the family golden child who had always chased status and wealth, simply patted her blonde hair and glared at our father. I did not scream. I did not cry. In my profession, you learn that raw anger gives away your power. Cold, calculated precision is what breaks them. I walked straight toward my father, my heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Jamal stepped in my path, his designer suit looking ridiculous in a police station at 4 in the morning. "What are you doing here, Nia?" He snapped, his voice dripping with the usual condescension he reserved for me. "Go home. You are going to make things worse. Chloe is having a severe panic attack." I looked at the brother who had always viewed me as the rebellious disappointment because I chose civil rights law over corporate greed. "You let your wife beat our father with a bat, Jamal," I said, my voice dangerously level. "And now you are standing here playing her bodyguard while Dad bleeds out on a police station floor. Move out of my way before I make you move." Hearing my voice, Chloe let out a dramatic wail. "Keep her away from me, Jamal," she cried out. "She is just as crazy as he is. He came at me, Nia. He did not even know who I was. His mind is completely gone." She buried her face back in Jamal's chest, her shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. It was the perfect performance. The classic weaponization of white tears designed to paint a black man as the aggressor and secure her position as the undeniable victim. The officer stood up instantly, placing a protective hand near his utility belt as he stepped toward me. "Mom, you need to step back. This is an active investigation and a family matter. If you cannot maintain your composure, I will have you removed from the precinct immediately." I ignored Jamal and turned my focus entirely on the officer. "My father has a severe head laceration and possible broken ribs," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every officer in the bullpen could hear. "Why has he not received medical attention? And why is the alleged victim the only one handcuffed to a chair?" "He assaulted this young woman," the officer replied defensively. his hand resting on his radio. Her husband confirmed the old man has dementia and had a violent episode. We are processing the arrest paperwork now. You need to leave the premises right now, or you will be placed under arrest for interfering. He reached out to grab my arm. That was his first critical mistake. I sidestepped his grasp, unclasped my leather tote, and pulled out my identification. I held it up right in front of his face so he could read every single engraved letter. I am Nia Marcus. I am a licensed attorney in the state of Georgia. More importantly, I am the senior legal counsel for the Atlanta Police Oversight Commission. You are currently holding my client, who is also my father, without medical care, based solely on the unverified claims of a woman who has no defensive injuries. While my client is actively bleeding from blunt force trauma, the officer froze. His hand dropped awkwardly to his side. All the color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He stared at the silver shield and the official city credentials that gave me the authority to launch a full investigation into his badge number before the sun even came up. "Mom, he stammered, stepping back. I had no idea he was related to someone from the commission. "That is exactly the problem," I replied, my voice slicing through the silent room. "You did not know who he was, so you assumed he was a threat instead of a victim." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Chief," I said, never breaking eye contact with the terrified officer in front of me. "I am standing in the 4th precinct. One of your officers has a bleeding 65-year-old man handcuffed to a bench, while the woman who bludgeoned him with a baseball bat is being served spring water. I need an ambulance here immediately, and I need the cuffs taken off my father right now, or my office will be filing a formal civil rights lawsuit against this department by 8 in the morning." The shift in the room's dynamic was instantaneous. The desk sergeant, who had been ignoring the situation, suddenly grabbed his radio and called for paramedics. The officer in front of me scrambled to pull out his keys. He practically tripped over himself, rushing to my father's side to unlock the heavy metal cuffs. Chloe suddenly stopped crying. The loud, theatrical sobs vanished, replaced by a tense, calculating glare. She peeked out from behind Jamal, realizing her flawless performance was falling apart. I knelt beside my father as the heavy metal cuffs fell away from his wrists. I rubbed his bruised skin, my heart breaking at the sight of his trembling hands, but his eyes were sharp and lucid. "I am okay, Nia," he breathed, squeezing my fingers. "I am not crazy. She came into my house. She demanded the deeds to the property. When I said no, she just started swinging." Jamal rushed over, his face red with a sudden desperate panic. "You are making a huge mistake, Nia," he sputtered. "Dad does not know what he is talking about. He is sick. He has been slipping for months. Chloe was just defending herself. We were trying to help him manage his estate because he is losing his mind." I stood up, putting myself firmly between my bleeding father and my cowardly brother. "You are a pathetic excuse for a son, Jamal. You stood by and watched this woman attack the man who raised you, and now you are trying to institutionalize him to cover her tracks." Chloe straightened up completely, dropping the blanket from her shoulders. Her voice was no longer that of a terrified victim. It was cold, sharp, and dripping with entitlement. "You cannot just come in here and threaten people, Nia. My father is a very powerful man in this city. He has friends in high places. He will have your job for this." I smiled, but there was absolutely no warmth in it. "I look forward to meeting him in court, Chloe. But right now, you are the one who just filed a false police report and assaulted an elderly man." The paramedics rushed through the double doors, rolling a stretcher toward us. They immediately began tending to my father, checking his vital signs and applying pressure to the deep wound on his head. I watched as they carefully helped him onto the stretcher, a massive wave of relief finally washing over me. But as they began wheeling my father toward the exit, I picked up his blood-stained coat from the floor. I reached into the inner pocket to grab his reading glasses, but my fingers brushed against a thick, folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed the creases. The bold black letters at the top made my blood run absolutely cold. It was an involuntary psychiatric admission form fully stamped by a private clinic. Attached to it was a medical power of attorney document. I looked down at the signature line. It was signed by Jamal. He was not just covering up an assault. He had legally signed away our father's freedom before the attack even happened. Jamal grabbed my arm, his grip digging painfully into my skin through the fabric of my blazer. "What exactly do you think you are proving here, Nia?" He spat the words at me, his breath reeking of expensive scotch and sheer panic. "You march in here flashing a piece of metal like you own the place. You are nothing but a lowly lawyer playing dress-up. Do you have any idea who Chloe's family is? The Sterlings own half the commercial real estate in this city. If you embarrass her tonight, if you make this a public spectacle and ruin her family's reputation, her father will pull the funding for my software company before sunrise." I yanked my arm out of his grasp so violently that he stumbled back a step. I smoothed my sleeve, refusing to break eye contact. "You let your wife crack Dad's head open with a baseball bat, and your biggest concern is your startup funding." I stepped closer to him, dropping my voice to a lethal register. "You have spent your entire life trying to buy your way into spaces that do not want you, Jamal. You married into a family that looks at you like a convenient diversity prop, and now you are willing to step over our father's bleeding body just to keep your invitation to their country club. You used Dad's money to fund your fake lifestyle, and now you treat him like garbage." Before Jamal could stammer out a response, a high-pitched shriek echoed across the bullpen. Chloe had thrown herself back onto the metal bench, her hands clutching her chest, as she began to violently hyperventilate. The performance was absolutely flawless. She kicked off her designer heels and curled her knees to her chest, making herself look as small and fragile as humanly possible. "He was going to kill me, Jamal." She wailed, her voice bouncing off the concrete walls of the precinct. "He is out of his mind. You all saw him. He had this crazy look in his eyes. He is completely senile. He does not even know his own name anymore. I was just trying to bring him a slice of pie and he attacked me. He is a monster." I thought I was going to die right there in the living room. The white police officer who had backed away when I first showed my credentials instantly rushed back to her side. His protective instincts were fully triggered by the weeping white woman in distress. "Mom, please try to breathe," the officer cooed, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "We are going to make sure you are safe. No one is going to hurt you here." He shot a defensive, hostile glare in my direction, clearly itching for a reason to put me in my place. "Counsel or not," he muttered, "you need to stop upsetting the victim. She has been through a massive trauma tonight. A massive trauma." I repeated the words slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of the statement hang heavy in the air. I looked at Chloe. Not a single blonde hair on her head was out of place. Her manicure was pristine. Her silk blouse did not have a single wrinkle or drop of blood on it. Meanwhile, my 65-year-old father was sitting on a gurney 10 feet away, a paramedic pressing a thick gauze pad to a gash on his forehead that was soaking through his collar. The reality of what was happening was entirely clear. I see this setup every single day in my line of work. A black man is injured, yet he is treated as the aggressor simply because a white woman decides to shed a few strategic tears. I did not waste another second arguing with a rookie cop who had already decided who the criminal was before he even stepped onto the scene. I pulled my phone from my pocket and bypassed the contacts list, dialing a direct private line. The precinct was quiet enough that everyone heard the phone ring twice. "Chief Davis," I said the moment the line connected. My voice was calm, projecting clearly across the entire room. "This is Nia Marcus. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am standing in the lobby of the 4th Precinct. One of your officers arrested my father, Jeremiah Marcus, a retired community pastor, after he was brutally assaulted in his own home. The assailant is sitting in your lobby right now, wrapped in a blanket and being treated to bottled spring water, while my father is bleeding from blunt force trauma to the head." I paused, making sure the officer in front of me heard every single syllable. "I expect a crime scene unit dispatched to my father's house immediately to secure the baseball bat used in the assault. I expect the body camera footage of the arresting officers to be preserved and uploaded to the oversight server by dawn. And if my father is not cleared to leave this precinct for the hospital in the next 30 seconds, my office will hold a press conference at 8 in the morning announcing a federal civil rights lawsuit against this entire department." The voice on the other end of the line was sharp and commanding. "Hand the phone to the desk sergeant right now, Nia." I walked over to the elevated desk and placed my phone down. The sergeant picked it up, his face draining of color as he listened to his ultimate superior tear into him. "Yes, Chief." "Understood, Chief. Right away, sir." He slammed the receiver down and yelled across the room. "Get the cuffs off the old man completely. Let the paramedics load him up. Now, move it." The atmosphere shifted violently. The paramedics, who had been waiting awkwardly for police clearance, immediately strapped my father onto the gurney and began wheeling him toward the sliding glass doors. I walked alongside him, grabbing his hand. The skin was cold, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "I am right behind you, Dad," I told him. "I am going to follow the ambulance in my car. Do not say a word to anyone until I get there." He gave a faint nod, his eyes tired but fully aware. As they pushed the gurney out into the humid Atlanta night air, I turned back to grab my briefcase from the bench. That was when the crying magically stopped. The hysterical sobbing, the hyperventilating, the trembling shoulders, it all vanished in a fraction of a second. I watched as Chloe wiped her eyes completely dry of actual tears and stood up. She smoothed down the front of her silk blouse and pushed her blonde hair over her shoulder. The fragile victim act was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating smirk that chilled me to the bone. She walked toward me, her designer heels clicking sharply on the floor. Jamal trailed behind her like an obedient puppy, refusing to meet my gaze. Chloe stopped just inches from my face. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. She did not hand it to me, she threw it. The paper hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. I did not bend down to pick it up immediately. I kept my eyes locked on hers, watching the pure malice dancing in her gaze. "You put on a great show," Nia Chloe whispered, her voice dripping with venom and victory. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room because you know how to intimidate a few beat cops. But you are playing checkers while my family plays chess." She leaned in closer, the scent of her expensive floral perfume making me sick to my stomach. "You saved that senile old man from spending the night in a jail cell. Congratulations. But you cannot save him from the psych ward." I stared at Jamal's signature on the medical power of attorney, the ink completely unbothered by the blood soaking the rest of the fabric. This was not a sudden panic over a violent episode. This was a premeditated execution of my father's civil rights. The involuntary psychiatric hold, a 1013 form in the state of Georgia, had a timestamp from yesterday afternoon. Jamal had secured a physician's signature a full 12 hours before Chloe ever picked up that baseball bat. I turned around to face my brother. The paramedics were strapping my father to the gurney, adjusting his oxygen mask, but I moved directly into Jamal's personal space. "You had him declared legally incompetent yesterday," I stated, my voice echoing off the precinct walls. "You bought a dirty doctor to sign a 1013 form so you could lock him up in a private facility." Chloe attacking him tonight was not self-defense. It was the catalyst you needed to trigger the medical transport. Jamal did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He straightened his designer tie, stepping out from in front of his wife. "Dad is a danger to himself, Nia. He has been hiding his decline from you because you are never around. I made the hard choice, the responsible choice as the man of this family." "You are not half the man he is," I fired back. "You forged his signature on medical evaluations and bribed a clinic to process the paperwork. That is elder abuse and medical fraud." Before Jamal could respond, the heavy glass doors of the precinct slid open. It was not the police backup, and it was not the regular hospital staff. Two large men wearing dark blue scrubs walked in, pushing a specialized transport chair equipped with heavy leather restraints. The logo on their shirts belonged to Pine Haven Behavioral Center, a private, incredibly expensive psychiatric facility notorious for holding wealthy patients against their will. Chloe crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "We called them while we were in the patrol car," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "They are going to take him somewhere nice, Nia, somewhere he cannot hurt anybody else." One of the transport orderlies approached the city paramedics, who were currently stabilizing my father's neck. "Excuse us," the orderly said, flashing a clipboard. We have a valid power of attorney and an active 1013 hold for Jeremiah Marcus. We will be taking over the patient's transport to a specialized psychiatric unit. The city paramedics paused, looking confused. They glanced at the paperwork the orderly shoved in their faces. In the state of Georgia, an active 1013 form, paired with a medical power of attorney, gives private medical contractors the absolute right to bypass emergency rooms and take custody of a patient. Jamal had planned this perfectly. Once they got my father behind the locked doors of Pine Haven, he would be heavily medicated, completely stripped of his communication rights, and entirely under Jamal's legal control. "You cannot interfere with this," Nia Jamal said, a sickeningly confident grin breaking through his earlier panic. "I am his legal guardian now. The state recognizes my authority. Step aside and let the professionals do their job." I looked at my brother, then at his smirking wife, and finally at the two large men moving aggressively toward my bleeding father. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought a piece of paper signed by a corrupt doctor was going to override my authority. I did not argue with the orderlies. I simply pulled out my phone and accessed the expedited judicial portal on my home screen. As the senior legal counsel for the Oversight Commission, I am required to carry a direct emergency line to the on-duty Superior Court judge for warrants and civil rights interventions. I tapped the screen, uploading a high-resolution photo of my father bleeding in handcuffs, alongside a digital copy of the police report I had just forced the desk sergeant to file regarding the assault. The orderlies grabbed the rails of my father's gurney. "Ma'am, you need to clear the way," the larger one barked. "Do not touch that gurney," I commanded. My voice cracked like a whip, causing the entire room to freeze. Jamal let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Nia, stop embarrassing yourself. You are a lawyer. You know how a POA works. You have no jurisdiction here." I stared directly into Jamal's eyes as I hit send on the digital petition. "I know exactly how a POA works, Jamal. I also know how an emergency ex parte injunction works." My phone vibrated in my palm less than 10 seconds later. I held up the glowing screen for the orderlies to see. The digital seal of a Fulton County Superior Court judge glowed brightly at the top of the PDF. "This is a court-ordered emergency injunction overriding your medical power of attorney due to an active criminal investigation of elder abuse and attempted homicide. The 1013 hold is hereby suspended. My client is entirely under the jurisdiction of Atlanta General Hospital, and if either of you take one more step toward him, I will have the desk sergeant arrest you for interfering with a federal civil rights investigation." The orderlies stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at my phone, saw the judge's digital signature, and immediately backed away from the gurney with their hands raised. They wanted a paycheck, not a felony charge. Chloe's smug smile vanished instantly. Her face contorted into pure rage. "You cannot do this," she screamed, completely abandoning her fragile victim persona. "He is dangerous. Jamal, do something." But Jamal was paralyzed. He stared at my phone like it was a loaded gun pointed directly at his chest. The city paramedics wasted no more time. They seized the opportunity, pushing the gurney right past the retreating orderlies and heading straight out the sliding glass doors toward the waiting ambulance. I turned my back on my brother and his wife, leaving them standing in the middle of the precinct, surrounded by police officers who had just witnessed their entire scheme fall apart. I sprinted out the doors, the humid night air hitting my face, as I caught up to the paramedics loading the stretcher into the back of the ambulance. I climbed in right behind them, taking a seat on the narrow bench as the heavy doors slammed shut. The sirens blared to life, tearing through the quiet streets of Atlanta as we sped toward the hospital. My father was lying flat on his back, an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. His eyes closed against the harsh overhead lights. His breathing was shallow but steady. I reached out and gently took his hand, holding it tight. "We are going to a real hospital, Dad," I told him, keeping my voice soft and steady. "You are safe now. I am going to tear up that power of attorney tomorrow morning. They will never get near you again." I felt his fingers tighten around mine with surprising force. He slowly pulled the oxygen mask down, slightly, ignoring the paramedic's immediate protest. His chest heaved as he struggled to speak, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a chill straight down my spine. Nia. He wheezed, his voice raspy and desperate. You have to listen to me. This was never about putting me in a facility. I squeezed his hand. I know, Dad. They wanted to cover up the assault. They wanted to silence you. He shook his head weakly, a fresh drop of blood slipping past the bandage on his forehead. No, he whispered, coughing violently before catching his breath. They do not want to lock me up. They want the land. They want your grandmother's property on Auburn Avenue. I froze. The historic Auburn Avenue estate. It was a massive multi-acre lot right in the middle of the most aggressively gentrifying district in the city. My grandmother had left it entirely to him, and developers had been circling like vultures for the past decade, offering ridiculous sums of money that my father had always flatly refused. Jamal had the papers in his briefcase. My father continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper as the ambulance swerved around a corner. He brought Chloe to the house tonight to force me to sign the transfer deeds to her father's company. When I refused, they pulled out that psychiatric form. They told me I could either sign over the multi-million-dollar property or they would declare me legally incompetent and take it anyway. When I reached for the phone to call you, Chloe picked up the bat. I sat back on the hard metal bench, the full magnitude of their betrayal crashing over me. This was not a panicked reaction. This was a multi-million-dollar hostile takeover orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. Jamal was willing to sell out our family's legacy and institutionalize his own father just to secure his position in Chloe's wealthy white family. A cold, dangerous calm washed over my entire body. I looked down at my father, his tired eyes pleading with me to protect the only thing our ancestors had left us. Do not worry, Dad, I said, my voice eerily quiet over the blaring sirens. They think they just lost a battle at the precinct. They have no idea I am about to burn their entire war to the ground. The ambulance tires screeched to a halt outside the emergency room bays at Atlanta General Hospital. I watched the medical team rush my father through the sliding glass doors, his blood still stark against the pristine white sheets of the gurney. The attending trauma doctor immediately ordered a CT scan and began prepping him for 12 stitches across his forehead. I stood in the sterile hallway, my hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline from the police station began to metabolize into a cold, hard focus. Jamal and Chloe wanted a war over the Auburn Avenue estate, and they were willing to spill our father's blood to get it. I was pulling out my phone to contact my private investigators when the emergency room doors slammed open. My mother, Beatrice, stormed into the waiting area. She was fully dressed in a tailored navy suit and pearls, her hair perfectly styled despite the fact that it was nearly 5 in the morning. Jamal and Chloe trailed right behind her like shadows. They had clearly gone straight to our family home to fetch her, spinning their own twisted narrative before I even had a chance to speak. I stepped forward, expecting to see terror and concern in a wife's eyes. I expected her to ask about my father's condition. I opened my mouth to tell her he was going to be okay, that he was getting stitched up just down the hall. I never got the words out. Beatrice marched directly up to me, raised her hand, and slapped me across the face with such force that my head snapped to the side. The sharp crack echoed down the quiet hospital corridor. A passing nurse stopped dead in her tracks, eyes wide, but I held up a hand to signal I did not need intervention. The sting burned across my cheek, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the absolute betrayal radiating from my mother's glare. Are you trying to destroy this family, Nia? My mother hissed, stepping so close I could smell the expensive mints she always chewed. Her voice was a low, venomous vibration that demanded submission. What is wrong with you? You marched into a police station and humiliated your brother in front of the entire department. You undermined his authority as the man of this house. I stood frozen, tasting copper where my teeth had caught the inside of my cheek. He tried to have his own father committed to a psychiatric ward, Mom, I said, my voice dangerously calm. He stood there while his wife beat your husband with a baseball bat. Dad is 30 feet away from you, getting his skull stitched back together, and you are worried about Jamal being humiliated. My mother did not even glance toward the trauma bays. She did not look through the glass where her husband of 40 years was lying bruised and battered. Instead, she turned around and reached out her hands toward Chloe. Chloe stepped forward, burying her face in her hands, squeezing out a fresh batch of completely fake tears. She held out her left arm, displaying a microscopic, barely visible red scratch near her wrist. It was a scratch she likely gave herself in the police car just to have something to show. "Oh, you poor sweet girl," my mother cooed, her voice instantly transforming from venom to dripping honey. She gently stroked Chloe's arm as if it were a mortal wound. "I am so terribly sorry for what you had to go through tonight, Chloe. Please, you must forgive Jeremiah. His mind is just completely gone. He does not know what he is doing anymore, and Nia has always been prone to these dramatic, hysterical outbursts. Please do not hold this against us." I watched my own mother bow her head and apologize to the white woman who had just tried to kill my father. It was the most sickening display of internalized subservience I had ever witnessed. But it also told me a story spanning decades. This was not just about tonight. This was about my mother's lifelong obsession with status, her desperate craving for validation from the white upper class, and her absolute worship of the Sterling family name. "You have lost your mind, Beatrice," I said, dropping the title of mother entirely. "That woman almost murdered your husband, and you are treating her like she is the victim." My mother spun around, her eyes flashing with a frantic, desperate anger. "Chloe was just defending herself," she snapped. "You do not understand anything about how the real world works, Nia. You never have. You sit in your little civil rights office fighting battles you cannot win while your brother is actually building something real. Do you have any idea who Chloe's family is? The Sterlings own half this city. Her father sits on the board of the country club. He has the power to make or break Jamal's entire future. Are you trying to make your brother get a divorce? Are you trying to ruin his one chance at actual wealth?" The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrifying clarity, the speed at which she defended them, the complete lack of surprise regarding my father's supposed dementia, the way she had arrived dressed to the nines, ready to perform for her wealthy daughter-in-law. She was not brainwashed by Jamal's lies. She was a willing participant. "You knew," I stated, the realization dropping the temperature of my blood to absolute zero. "You knew Jamal was planning to institutionalize Dad. You knew they were trying to steal the Auburn Avenue estate." Jamal shifted uncomfortably behind Chloe, refusing to meet my eyes, but Beatrice did not flinch. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin with a chilling sense of righteous justification. "Your father is a stubborn, foolish man who refuses to see the bigger picture," she said, her tone devoid of any marital affection. "That land has been sitting there gathering dust and tax bills for years. He wants to hold on to some outdated piece of history while developers are practically throwing millions of dollars at our feet. We have struggled for decades, Nia. We scraped by while other people lived in luxury." I stared at her, feeling sick to my stomach. "So you helped them trap him? You helped your son orchestrate a false medical diagnosis to lock your husband away in a facility just so you could cash in on his property?" Beatrice stepped forward, invading my space one last time. There was no mother left in her eyes, only a greedy, hollow shell of a woman who had sold her soul for a zip code and a designer handbag. "Your father is old and useless, Nia," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, cold whisper that echoed in the sterile hospital corridor. "He has served his purpose. Thanks to Chloe, your brother is about to become a millionaire. Do not get in this family's way." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. A mother's love was not unconditional. It came with a massive price tag, and my brother was the only one willing to pay it. I did not waste another breath on Beatrice. My grief evaporated instantly, replaced by a razor-sharp focus as the heavy double doors of the trauma unit swung open. A tall physician with slicked-back hair and an arrogant stride walked into the waiting area. His pristine white coat bore the embroidered name, Dr. Montgomery, Chief of Psychiatric Services. He did not look like a doctor working the grueling night shift in a public trauma center. He carried himself like a man accustomed to private clinics and wealthy donors. He walked right past me and headed straight for my brother and my sister-in-law. Jamal, Chloe. The doctor said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. I have processed the paperwork. I did a brief preliminary evaluation while they were stitching his forehead. Given the clear signs of advanced dementia disorientation and the violent episode you described, I am legally validating the involuntary hold. As soon as the physical trauma is stabilized, my private transport team will move him to our facility. Beatrice let out a loud sigh of relief, clutching her pearls. Oh, thank God, she murmured. Finally, some peace for this family. You will do absolutely no such thing, Doctor, I said, stepping directly into the center of their little circle. Dr. Montgomery blinked, looking at me as if I were a piece of trash that had somehow blown into his sterile hospital. Excuse me, he said, drawing himself up to his full height. This is a private medical discussion with the patient's legally appointed guardians. Security can escort you out if you cannot respect hospital policy. I did not back down an inch. I am Nia Marcus. I am the patient's daughter, and more importantly, I am a civil rights attorney who specializes in medical fraud. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the clipboard in his hands. I suggest you listen to me very carefully before you end up facing a federal grand jury. Jamal scoffed, rolling his eyes. Do not listen to her, doctor. She is just throwing a tantrum. My wife and I have the medical power of attorney. You have your orders. I ignored my brother entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the physician. Dr. Montgomery? I began, my voice cold and precise. You just stated that you validated a dementia diagnosis after a brief preliminary evaluation on a patient suffering from acute head trauma, blood loss, and shock. Under Title 37 of the Georgia Code, an involuntary psychiatric hold requires a comprehensive neurological workup to rule out physical trauma as the cause of disorientation. But you did not do a neurological workup, did you? The doctor's arrogant posture faltered slightly. He shifted his weight, his grip tightening on his clipboard. In my professional medical opinion, the patient poses an immediate threat to his family. The paperwork is perfectly legal. Is it? I countered, taking a step closer so he had to look me dead in the eye. Because that involuntary hold document you are holding was signed and time-stamped by your clinic yesterday afternoon. You signed a psychiatric order declaring a man legally incompetent 24 hours before this so-called violent episode even occurred. You signed it 24 hours before you ever laid eyes on the patient. Dr. Montgomery went entirely rigid. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He looked frantically at Jamal, completely exposing their conspiracy without saying a single word. Jamal had paid this doctor to falsify medical documents before Chloe ever picked up that baseball bat. That is a serious accusation. Dr. Montgomery stammered, his confident medical persona crumbling into pieces. It is not an accusation, it is a proven fact, I stated, pulling my phone from my pocket. And it gets much worse for you. I ran a background check on your private behavioral clinic while I was following the ambulance. Your facility receives substantial funding from a real estate development group owned by the Sterling family. I gestured toward Chloe, who was suddenly glaring daggers at the doctor. So let us review the facts. You accepted financial incentives from this woman's family to falsify psychiatric documents, thereby stripping a black man of his civil rights and his property. That crosses the line from state medical malpractice into a federal conspiracy to commit wire fraud and elder abuse. Chloe stepped forward, dropping her fragile victim act entirely. Dr. Montgomery, she hissed, her voice sharp and threatening. My father pays the lease on your entire building. You are going to sign that transfer order right now, or I swear to God I will have your clinic shut down by Monday morning. It was the most beautiful, arrogant mistake she could have possibly made. She confirmed the entire financial conspiracy right in the middle of a crowded emergency room. I smiled, tapping the screen of my phone. Thank you, Chloe. I just recorded that threat. Now, Dr. Montgomery, you have exactly 10 seconds to make a choice. You can proceed with this fraudulent transfer, and I will personally hand this recording and the timestamped documents to the State Medical Board and the FBI. You will lose your license, your clinic, and you will spend the next 10 years in federal prison. Or you can do your actual job. The silence in the hospital corridor was deafening. The doctor looked at Chloe, who was fuming with white-hot entitlement, and then he looked at me. He realized instantly that Chloe's family money could not protect him from a federal indictment. He was nothing but a pawn in their real estate game, and I had just backed him into a corner he could not buy his way out of. Dr. Montgomery swallowed hard. His hands shook as he pulled a pen from his breast pocket. He flipped the clipboard over and drew a massive aggressive line straight across the involuntary hold form. Upon secondary review of the patient's physical trauma, he announced, his voice trembling, "I find no evidence of chronic cognitive decline. The disorientation is strictly due to the head injury. The patient is fully competent. The psychiatric hold is officially voided." "No!" Jamal screamed, lunging forward to grab the doctor's arm. "You cannot do this. We paid you. We had a deal. You cannot back out now." The doctor ripped his arm away from my brother, looking at him with sheer panic. "Do not ever contact me again," he snapped. He turned and practically sprinted down the hallway, desperate to distance himself from the toxic fallout of my family. Jamal stood frozen in the middle of the corridor. The reality of his failure crashed down on him. Because the doctor had just declared my father legally competent, the medical power of attorney Jamal held was now completely useless. A medical power of attorney only activates when a patient is incapacitated. My father was awake, aware, and legally in charge of his own life. They could not force him into a facility. They could not silence him. Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. She looked at Jamal, her golden child who had just failed to secure their ticket to high society. "Jamal, do something," she pleaded. But there was nothing Jamal could do. I had just dismantled their entire medical trap in less than 5 minutes. I turned to Chloe. The fake tears were gone. The trembling hands were gone. She stood there, her posture rigid, her blue eyes burning with a hatred so deep and pure it was almost impressive. She had lost the battle at the police station, and she had just lost the medical war. But Chloe was a sterling. She had been raised to believe that the world belonged to her by right, and she was not about to walk away empty-handed. She took a slow, deliberate step toward me. A nasty, triumphant smirk slowly spread across her lips. "You really think you won tonight, Nia?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You think because you saved him from a psych ward that you actually beat me?" I held my ground, staring her down. "You are out of moves, Chloe. It is over." She let out a short, harsh laugh. "Oh, honey, you are so busy playing the hero that you forgot to check the bank accounts. It does not matter if you keep that old man out of a facility. It does not matter if he is competent, because the Auburn Avenue land is no longer yours." I frowned, my heart skipping a sudden erratic beat. "What are you talking about?" Chloe tilted her head, her smile widening into a twisted grin. "Why do you think we needed the medical power of attorney yesterday, Nia? We did not need it to lock him up. We needed it to sign the papers on his behalf while he was heavily medicated from his blood pressure pills last night. Jamal legally transferred the deed 12 hours ago. My father's development company already wired the deposit. The land is gone." The air vanished from my lungs. I did not waste time arguing with her. I spun around, marched over to the empty reception desk, and ripped my laptop out of my leather tote bag. I flipped the screen open, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I immediately accessed the Georgia Real Estate Record System. The glare of the hospital reception monitor cast a harsh blue light across my face as I bypassed the public access portal and logged directly into the expedited county clerk database. Behind me, I could hear the rhythmic clicking of Chloe's designer heels as she confidently sauntered over, followed by the heavy, anxious footsteps of my mother and brother. They wanted a front row seat to my devastation. They wanted to watch the exact moment my heart broke. I typed in our family's trust identification number. The Auburn Avenue estate was not just a piece of dirt. It was a sprawling, multi-acre commercial and residential block sitting right in the epicenter of Atlanta's most aggressive gentrification zone. Our grandfather had bought that land during segregation building businesses when the banks refused to lend to black men. It was worth $15 million on a bad day, but to our community it was absolutely priceless. Now, wealthy white developers were circling the district, eager to tear down our history and replace it with overpriced coffee shops and luxury condos. The search results populated on my screen. My eyes scanned the digital ledger and there it was. A brand new, hastily filed, quitclaim deed time stamped just 3 hours ago. Jamal had not just planned to lock our father away. He had used the brief window when Dad was asleep, heavily sedated from his blood pressure medication earlier that evening, to execute the fraudulent medical power of attorney. He had legally signed over the entire historic property. I clicked on the buyer information. The receiving entity was registered as Sterling Developments LLC, Chloe's father. "Well, go ahead and say it," Chloe taunted, leaning over my shoulder to look at the screen. She smelled of victory and expensive champagne. "My father has been trying to buy that decrepit block for 5 years. Your dad was too stubborn to take a generous buyout. Now my family gets the land and Jamal gets a massive executive payout for facilitating the acquisition. Everybody wins, Nia." My mother stepped up next to Chloe, placing a supportive hand on her white daughter-in-law's shoulder. "It is for the best," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with shameless justification. "That neighborhood is changing. We need to evolve. Jamal is bringing this family into the 21st century. With the commission he is getting from the Sterlings, we will finally have the kind of wealth we deserve. We can move to Buckhead. We can actually belong." I kept my eyes glued to the screen, reading every single line of the hastily drafted contract. Jamal had sold out our grandfather's legacy, our father's life work, for a seat at a table where he would only ever be the hired help. He had traded a $15 million generational asset for a quick payout from a white billionaire who would never truly respect him. Jamal finally found his voice, stepping out from behind the two women. "I had to do it, Nia," he said, puffing out his chest, trying to sound like a ruthless corporate titan instead of a desperate thief. "You do not understand how real estate works. The city was going to zone us out eventually anyway. I made a strategic maneuver. Mr. Sterling wired a $2 million non-refundable deposit into my holding account the second the deed was filed. The transaction is already logged. The money is mine. The land is theirs. You cannot unring this bell, little sister. Go back to your civil rights desk. The grown-ups are doing business now." They stood there, a unified front of absolute betrayal. Chloe basking in the glow of her family's modern-day colonial conquest. Beatrice completely blinded by the illusion of high society inclusion, willing to trade her husband's sanity for an invitation to a country club. And Jamal, a man who had sold his soul for a fancy watch and a pat on the head from his wealthy white father-in-law. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to cry, to throw a hysterical fit right there in the emergency room, validating every negative stereotype they secretly held against me. I looked at the bold green text at the bottom of the county clerk's portal. It read, "Transaction completed. Funds transferred." I closed the laptop. The sharp snap of the screen shutting echoed loudly in the quiet reception area. I slowly turned around, leaning my lower back against the tall wooden desk. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were filled with greedy anticipation. I looked at Chloe, who was already mentally picking out the bulldozers to demolish our family home. And finally, I looked at Jamal, who was desperately trying to mask his cowardice with a smug grin. I did not panic. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I felt a slow, dark smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that makes predators realize they are actually the prey. I tilted my head, looking my brother dead in the eyes. "You are a very foolish man, Jamal." I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of an executioner's gavel. "You just took $2 million from a ruthless billionaire for a piece of property that Dad does not even own." I did not stay to watch my brother try to decipher the panic suddenly rising in his chest. I simply closed my laptop, picked up my leather tote, and walked away. I left them standing in the fluorescent glare of the emergency room, choking on the massive legal landmine I had just planted in their heads. My immediate priority was my father. I used my commission credentials to transfer him to a private secure recovery wing on the top floor of the hospital. I registered him under a confidential alias, so my mother and Chloe could not bypass security to harass him. For the next 3 days, the silence from my family was absolute. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the frantic, terrifying quiet of rats scrambling in the dark, trying to figure out if the trap they stepped on was actually rigged to blow. I did not send any threatening text messages. I did not file an immediate lawsuit. When you are preparing to dismantle someone's entire existence, you do not warn them. You let them get comfortable. You let them believe they got away with it. Instead of arguing, I went to my office in Midtown and made a single phone call to a man named Malik. Malik spent 15 years as a forensic accountant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation before opening an elite private intelligence firm. He was the kind of man who could find a missing dollar bill at the bottom of the ocean. I gave him 2 names, Jamal and the Sterling Development Group. I told him I wanted every bank statement, every tax return, and every hidden corporate asset ripped wide open. The psychological warfare began to take its toll on my brother by the end of the week. Jamal could not handle the silence. He needed validation like he needed oxygen. On Thursday afternoon, my cell phone rang. I saw his name flashing on the screen and answered on the 4th ring, making sure to keep my breathing perfectly slow and even. Nia, he said, his voice loud and artificially cheerful over the background noise of clinking silverware and smooth jazz. He was clearly sitting in some overpriced restaurant playing the role of the successful tech mogul. I just wanted to call and check on you. You looked pretty unhinged at the hospital the other night. I wanted to make sure you were not having a breakdown after that little bluff you tried to pull. I leaned back in my desk chair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I am perfectly fine, Jamal. I am just busy working. Working, he scoffed, the familiar condescension dripping from every word. You mean doing pro bono work for people who cannot even afford to pay your parking tickets? You really need to elevate your mindset, little sister. You have spent your whole life fighting these angry, bitter battles trying to prove some kind of point to mom and dad. Meanwhile, I am actually building a legacy. In fact, I am looking at my wrist right now. I just bought myself a platinum Rolex President. $40,000 in cold, hard cash. Consider it a reward for my business acumen. He took a sip of whatever expensive liquor he was drinking. The ice clinked loudly against the glass. You see, Nia, this is what real power looks like. The Sterlings invited me to their private box at the country club tomorrow. My father-in-law introduced me to a state senator this morning. We are operating on a completely different level now. I know you were trying to scare me in the emergency room with that cryptic comment about the land, but my lawyers checked the county records. The deed transfer went through perfectly. The deposit cleared. You have nothing. You are just jealous because Mom always knew I was the one who was going to elevate this family name. You can stay in your little civil rights bubble, but do not ever try to threaten my success again. I let him finish his entire monologue. I let him bask in his delusion. I knew exactly why he bought that watch. He bought it because he grew up in a working-class black neighborhood, and he spent his entire adult life feeling inferior to his wealthy white in-laws. He needed a $40,000 piece of metal on his wrist to convince himself that he actually belonged at their dinner table. He was a small, insecure boy wearing a costume paid for with stolen money. Enjoy the watch, Jamal. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Just make sure you keep the receipt. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk. Less than an hour later, the heavy glass door of my office swung open. Malik walked in wearing his signature tailored charcoal suit. He did not say a word as he crossed the room and dropped a massive red classified folder onto my glass desk. The thud echoed in the quiet office. You were right, Malik said, taking a seat opposite me. The Sterling family is not just a real estate empire. They operate a network of predatory lending companies disguised as venture capital firms. They target minority-owned businesses, offer them massive loans with toxic interest rates, and then seize their commercial assets when the businesses inevitably default. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted financial documents Malik had managed to unearth. What about my brother? I asked, flipping to the second section of the dossier. Malik leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Your brother is putting on the performance of a lifetime. His software startup is a complete ghost town. He has 0 active clients and 0 revenue. He burned through his initial investment capital 2 years ago, trying to maintain a luxury lifestyle to impress his wife's family. Jamal is not a successful tech CEO, Naya. His company is currently carrying $4.5 million in toxic debt. He has defaulted on 3 separate commercial loans in the last 6 months. I stared at the financial statements in absolute disbelief. The numbers were catastrophic. Jamal was not just broke, he was facing total financial ruin. The $2 million deposit he received from stealing our father's land was not a strategic business move to expand his empire. It was an act of pure desperate survival. He was drowning, and the water was already over his head. Look at the creditor holding his largest debt. Malik pointed to a highlighted line on the 3rd page. I traced my finger across the document. The primary lender holding the lien on Jamal's failing business was a subsidiary corporation fully owned by Chloe's father. The realization hit me like a physical strike to the chest. The Sterlings were not welcoming Jamal into their high society family. They were using him. They had intentionally funded his failing business, intentionally let him drown in debt, and then used that debt as leverage to force him to steal the Auburn Avenue property from our father. Chloe did not marry Jamal because she loved him. She married him because he was the weak, insecure Trojan horse her father needed to infiltrate our family and steal a $15 million piece of historic black real estate. I closed the folder, a dark, dangerous energy settling deep into my bones. Jamal thought he was playing chess with billionaires, but he was nothing more than a pawn being sacrificed on their board. He had sold out his own blood for a platinum watch and a fake seat at a table where he was actually the main course. Thank you, Malik, I said, locking the dossier inside my desk drawer. It is time to let them dig their graves a little deeper. I thought the dossier was the final piece of the puzzle, but Malik did not stand up to leave. Instead, he reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit and pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive. He set it gently on the glass surface of my desk, right next to the financial records that proved my brother was a completely broke, desperate fraud. My cyber team went a little deeper than just corporate tax returns, Malik said, his voice dropping an octave. We managed to bypass the 2-factor authentication on your sister-in-law's cloud storage. She backed up her phone 3 hours ago. You are going to want to read the group chat she shares with her friends back in Buckhead. I picked up the drive. It felt unnaturally heavy in my palm. I plugged it into my secure terminal and opened the extracted text files. The chat was titled The Sterling Girls, a group message between Chloe and 3 other wealthy entitled white women who spent their days drinking mimosas and spending their father's money. I scrolled past the mundane conversations about country club renovations and designer handbags, jumping straight to the timestamps from the night of the assault. What I read made the blood freeze solid in my veins. The sheer, unadulterated malice radiating from the screen was suffocating. Chloe had texted the group at 2 a.m, right before she picked up the baseball bat. The message read, I am so sick of dealing with Jamal's ghetto family. We have to throw this senile old black man in an asylum tonight so Jamal and I can finally liquidate that dirt patch on Auburn Avenue. He is just a stubborn relic standing in the way of my father's development project. One of her friends had replied asking if the old man was going to fight back, warning Chloe to be careful, because the neighborhood was dangerous. Chloe's response was a masterclass in the weaponization of race. She had typed, "Let him try to fight back. If he does not sign the deed tonight, I will just turn on the waterworks. You guys know exactly how it is down here in the South. The police will always believe a terrified, crying white woman over a big, angry black guy. I will have him in handcuffs before he can even blink. Jamal is too desperate for my dad's approval to stop me." I pushed my chair back from the desk, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the armrest to steady myself. The physical assault at the house was horrible. The financial theft of the property was devastating. But this was an entirely different level of evil. This was the exact historical violence that has destroyed black men in America for centuries. Chloe did not just view my father as an obstacle, she viewed his race as a weapon she could easily trigger to destroy him. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that a white woman's tears in front of a Southern police officer could have easily ended with my father being shot dead in his own living room. And Jamal, my own flesh and blood, had stood there and allowed his wife to pull that trigger. I disconnected the flash drive and dropped it into my briefcase. I did not say another word to Malik. I walked straight out of my office, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and drove directly back to Atlanta General Hospital. The private recovery wing on the top floor was completely silent, guarded by a security detail I had personally vetted. I walked past the nurse's station and pushed open the heavy wooden door to my father's suite. The room was bathed in the soft golden light of the late afternoon sun. My father was sitting up in his hospital bed. The thick white bandage across his forehead was a stark reminder of the violence he had endured, but the color had returned to his face. He was holding a worn leather Bible in his lap, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline. The very city he had helped build. The city his own son was currently trying to sell out from under him. "Nia," he said softly, turning his head to look at me. "You have that look in your eye. The one you get right before you dismantle a hostile witness on the stand." I pulled up a chair and sat directly beside his bed. I did not try to soften the blow. I did not try to protect him from the ugly reality of what our family had become. He was a grown man, a leader of his community, and he deserved to know exactly what kind of snakes he had been harboring under his roof. I opened my briefcase, pulled out my encrypted tablet, and loaded the screenshots of Chloe's text messages. I handed the device to him. "You need to read this, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Malik's team extracted this from Chloe's phone. This is what she texted her friends right before she attacked you." My father took the tablet. He adjusted his reading glasses, his calloused fingers gripping the edges of the device. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched him read the words, "senile old black man." I watched him process the cold, calculated threat of using white tears to manipulate the police. I braced myself for the heartbreak. I expected the pastor in him to surface the man who always preached grace and forgiveness. I expected him to weep for the son who had allowed this racial hatred to enter their home. But Jeremiah Marcus did not shed a single tear. The heart monitor beside his bed did not spike. His breathing did not hitch. Instead, a profound, terrifying stillness washed over him. The gentle, forgiving pastor evaporated, leaving behind a man who had grown up during the civil rights movement, a man who had faced down police dogs and water hoses to secure his place in this world. He slowly lowered the tablet and placed it on the bedside table. He took off his reading glasses and folded them with meticulous precision. He looked out the window again, his jaw set in a hard, unbreakable line. "I raised that boy to be a king," my father said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant baritone that filled the entire room. I worked my fingers to the bone so he would never have to bow his head to anyone, and he invited a woman into my home who views my blackness as a weapon she can use to execute me. He watched her try to lynch me with a police badge just so he could wear a fancy suit and pretend he belongs to her father. He turned to look at me, and the sheer, unyielding power in his eyes took my breath away. There was no sorrow left. There was only the cold, hard clarity of a patriarch who realizes a diseased branch must be severed to save the rest of the tree. "Beatrice has lost her mind to greed," he continued, speaking of his wife of 40 years, as if she were a stranger. "She would rather see me locked in an asylum than lose her invitation to the country club. They have both made their choices. They chose the illusion of white wealth over their own blood." He reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand around mine. His grip was absolute iron. He did not look like a victim recovering in a hospital bed. He looked like a general preparing for war. "You told me they filed a fraudulent deed to transfer the Auburn Avenue estate," he stated. "Yes," I replied. "Jamal signed it over to Sterling Developments using the fake power of attorney. They think they have won. They think you are neutralized and the land is theirs. They are parading around the city right now, celebrating their victory." My father nodded slowly. A deep, formidable calm settled over his features. He squeezed my hand, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, uncompromising resolve. "Then let them celebrate, Nia. Let them put on their fancy clothes and clink their champagne glasses. Let them think they have conquered the old man." He leaned back against his pillows, the corners of his mouth turning up into a grim, knowing smile. It is time to teach them a lesson. I stepped out of my father's hospital suite, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me. The hallway was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors from the adjacent rooms. I had just watched my father, a man who had spent his entire life preaching forgiveness, firmly close the book on mercy. He had given me the green light to burn his own son and wife to the ground. My blood felt like ice water. I was no longer just an attorney defending a client. I was an executioner preparing the gallows. My cell phone vibrated violently against my palm. I glanced down at the glowing screen. The caller ID read, Beatrice. I did not have her saved as Mom. I had stripped her of that title years ago, right around the time she skipped my law school graduation to attend a silent auction with Jamal and his wealthy fraternity brothers. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, keeping my breathing perfectly measured. Nia Beatrice barked, skipping any form of greeting. Her voice was sharp, fast, and entirely devoid of the panicked desperation she had displayed in the emergency room. She sounded like a woman organizing a corporate merger, not a wife whose husband had just received 12 stitches. I am calling to give you strict instructions regarding next weekend. I leaned against the cool plaster wall of the hospital corridor, crossing my ankles. I am listening, Beatrice. Next Saturday is the 40th wedding anniversary for your father and me, she announced, her tone dripping with manufactured grandeur. Jamal and Chloe are hosting a massive celebration for us at the Waldorf Astoria in Buckhead. It is going to be an exclusive black tie affair. The entire Sterling family will be in attendance. Chloe's father has invited several city council members, real estate moguls, and the board of directors from the country club. It is the most important social event this family has ever been a part of. I stared at the sterile white ceiling tiles above me, completely baffled by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. Your husband is currently lying in a hospital bed with a fractured skull because your daughter-in-law beat him with a baseball bat, I replied, my voice dangerously flat. And you are planning a ballroom gala. Beatrice let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Nia. Your father is being discharged on Thursday. The doctors assured us he will be perfectly fine to sit in a wheelchair for a few hours. Jamal has already arranged for a private nurse to administer a mild sedative before the event. We are going to present it as a touching tribute to a man struggling with his cognitive decline. It will garner absolute sympathy from the Sterlings. It shows that our family is united, resilient, and ready to step into the upper echelon of Atlanta society. The sickness in my stomach twisted into pure, unadulterated rage. She was not just complicit in the theft of his property. She was actively participating in his public degradation. She was willing to drug her own husband, parade him around in a wheelchair like a broken, senile prop, all to secure the pity and approval of the wealthy white family that was actively stealing from them. And where do I fit into this little theatrical production of yours, I asked. You do not, she snapped instantly. That is exactly why I am calling. You are explicitly forbidden from attending this anniversary gala, Nia. I have already instructed the hotel security to deny you entry at the door. Is that so? I am not going to let you ruin this for... Jamal. Beatrice hissed, the venom finally bleeding through her refined facade. You have always been completely unhinged. You are loud, you are abrasive, and you carry this ridiculous aggressive civil rights chip on your shoulder everywhere you go. You do not know how to behave around people of their caliber. The Sterlings are sophisticated generational wealth. They do not want to be lectured by some militant, angry black woman in a cheap business suit. If you show up, you will embarrass us. You lack the class to sit at a table with these people, and I will not have you making my family look like ghetto trash in front of our new in-laws. Her words were designed to cut to trigger the deep childhood wounds she had spent decades carving into my psyche. Growing up, I was always too dark, too outspoken, too natural, while Jamal was the handsome, compliant golden boy who knew how to code switch and bend the knee. She expected me to yell. She expected me to cry. She wanted a reaction so she could hang up and tell her wealthy new friends exactly how unstable I was. Instead, I let a long, heavy silence stretch over the phone line. I listened to the faint nervous hitch in her breathing as she waited for my explosion. I pictured the heavily redacted financial dossier sitting locked in my desk drawer. I pictured the wire fraud evidence, the extortion trap Jamal had walked into, and the absolute destruction waiting for the Sterling family the second I pulled the trigger. I smiled. It was a cold, brilliant, devastating smile. "You are absolutely right, Beatrice," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed sweetness. "I would not dream of ruining your perfect society debut. A black tie gala at the Waldorf Astoria sounds incredibly exclusive. You and Jamal should definitely wear your absolute best outfits. Make sure you smile wide for all the cameras." Beatrice paused, clearly thrown off balance by my calm compliance. "You mean it. You are not going to cause a scene. I would not miss this milestone for the world, but you do not need to worry about my lack of class," I replied, my tone remaining impossibly cheerful. "You can cancel your instructions to hotel security. Rest assured, Beatrice, I will not be coming as a guest." I ended the call before she could process the weight of that promise. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the darkened screen for a fraction of a second before dialing a new number. Malik answered on the first ring. "Are the financial trap wires fully primed?" I asked, pushing off the hospital wall and striding purposefully toward the elevator banks. "Every single account is locked, loaded, and waiting for your command." Malik replied, his voice a low, steady rumble of efficiency. "Jamal's shell company is completely boxed in. The Sterlings have no idea they are holding fraudulent deeds. We have 3 federal agents from the white-collar crime division on standby. They have reviewed the wire fraud evidence and the extortion texts. They are just waiting for the green light." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The mirrored walls of the elevator car reflected a woman who was done playing defense. "Give them the green light," I commanded. "Tell the agents to suit up. They are throwing a massive party at the Waldorf Astoria next Saturday. The entire Sterling family will be there alongside my brother and my mother. I want them all corralled in one room. We are going to drop the hammer in front of every single billionaire and politician they have ever tried to impress." "Understood," Malik said. "I will start tightening the noose immediately." I hung up the phone as the elevator descended. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest since 3 in the morning completely dissolved. Beatrice thought she was locking me out of high society. She had absolutely no idea she had just built a beautiful glittering cage, locked herself inside with a pack of rabid wolves, and handed me the only key. She wanted a performance to remember for her 40th anniversary. I was going to give her a show that would echo through Atlanta for the next 100 years. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was dripping in crystal and hypocrisy. From my vantage point in the darkened mezzanine overlooking the main floor, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire circus my mother had orchestrated. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided across the marble floors, carrying silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the absolute destruction of our family legacy. My mother, Beatrice, was in her element. She wore a custom emerald green evening gown that cost more than my first car, her neck heavy with rented diamonds. She fluttered from table to table, laughing too loudly and touching the arms of wealthy white politicians and real estate moguls she had never met before tonight. She was desperate to prove she belonged in this room. She wanted these people to look past her blackness and see only the wealth she was currently projecting. But the true sickness of the evening was concentrated at the head table. There sat Chloe, draped in a sheer silver dress, playing the role of the devoted, angelic daughter-in-law. Every time a society photographer walked by, Chloe would lean over and gently pat the hand of the man sitting in the wheelchair beside her. That man was my father. Jamal had dressed our dad in a sharp tuxedo, but the dignity stopped there. They had hired a private uniformed nurse to stand directly behind his wheelchair, turning him into a living, breathing medical prop. The thick white bandage from the baseball bat attack was clearly visible across his forehead. Jamal had instructed the nurse to administer a mild sedative right before the party started, just enough to make his eyes droop and his posture slump. They needed him to look docile. They needed him to look legally incompetent, so no one in that room would question why his son was suddenly in charge of his multi-million-dollar estate. I watched Chloe lean in and whisper to a wealthy socialite passing by their table. "It breaks my heart to see him like this," Chloe said, her voice carrying up to the mezzanine perfectly. "The dementia makes him so confused and prone to falling. He took a terrible tumble down the stairs earlier this week. Jamal and I have practically moved in just to make sure he does not hurt himself again." The socialite gasped, pressing a hand to her pearls, and told Chloe she was an absolute saint for taking on such a heavy burden. Chloe just smiled modestly and took a sip of her champagne. The audacity of the woman who had bludgeoned my father to sit there and farm sympathy points from his injuries made my blood run entirely cold. But the real star of Jamal's twisted fantasy was Charles Sterling, Chloe's father. Mr. Sterling held court at the center of the head table like a feudal lord surveying his newly conquered territory. He had the kind of aggressive, leathery tan that comes from exclusively vacationing on private yachts. He spoke loudly, completely dominating every conversation, while Jamal sat next to him, nodding vigorously at every mediocre point the billionaire made. Jamal had completely abandoned his actual voice. He was code-switching so hard, he sounded like a completely different person, laughing at Sterling's jokes and fetching him fresh drinks like a glorified intern. "You know, Jamal," Mr. Sterling bellowed, slapping my brother hard on the back, "it takes a smart man to realize when a neighborhood has run its course. That Auburn Avenue district is nothing but blight and decay now. It is a shame what happened to those old historic blocks, but nostalgia does not pay the bills. It takes real capital to clean up a mess like that. You made the right choice handing the reins over to the experts. We are going to bulldoze those outdated brick buildings and put up a beautiful luxury retail center. We will bring the right kind of clientele back into the city." Jamal swallowed hard, his smile looking brittle and strained around the edges. "Absolutely, sir," Jamal agreed, abandoning our grandfather's legacy without a second thought. "The area needs your vision. We are just grateful for the partnership." Beatrice leaned across the table, her eyes shining with absolute worship as she looked at Mr. Sterling. "We are the ones who should be thanking you, Charles. Jeremiah was always too stubborn for his own good. He held on to that dirt for decades while we scraped by. This alliance between our families is exactly what we needed to finally elevate ourselves." She did not even look at her husband sitting in the wheelchair right next to her. She spoke about him as if he were already dead and buried. But from my angle, I could see something they could not. My father's head was bowed, and his eyes were half closed, playing the part of the heavily sedated patient perfectly. But his hands resting on the arms of the wheelchair were not trembling. His fingers tapped a slow, steady rhythmic beat against the leather armrest. He was sharp, he was lucid, and he was waiting for my signal. The string quartet suddenly stopped playing. A hush fell over the grand ballroom as the event coordinator tapped a spoon against a crystal glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator announced over the microphone, "if I could please direct your attention to the head table. Mr. Charles Sterling would like to say a few words to honor our hosts tonight." The crowd of 300 elite guests turned their chairs, their applause polite and refined. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket. He picked up his champagne flute and raised it high, flashing a brilliant, predatory smile at the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Mr. Sterling began, his voice booming effortlessly across the ballroom. "We are gathered to celebrate 40 years of marriage between Beatrice and Jeremiah Marcus, but we are also here to celebrate the future. Tonight marks the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. For too long, the potential of this great city has been held back by the past. But thanks to the forward thinking of my son-in-law Jamal, we have officially finalized a real estate acquisition that will change the face of downtown Atlanta forever." The crowd murmured their approval. Wealthy investors nodded to each other, already calculating their own profit margins. Chloe beamed, resting her head on Jamal's shoulder to create the perfect picture of a successful dynasty. Beatrice looked like she was about to cry tears of pure joy. "We are not just merging two companies tonight," Mr. Sterling declared, his voice rising to a triumphant crescendo. "We are merging two families. We are cleaning up the old to make way for the new. So please raise your glasses with me. to a wonderful real estate partnership, to prosperity, and to the unstoppable alliance of the Sterling and Marcus families. 300 crystal glasses went up in the air. Before a single drop of champagne could touch their lips, the heavy solid oak double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were violently shoved apart with an explosive, deafening crash that echoed like a gunshot over the silent crowd. I stood framed in the archway of the grand ballroom. I was wearing a bespoke crimson power suit, a color chosen deliberately to command every ounce of attention in the room. I did not come alone. Flanking me were two of the most distinguished medical professionals in the country, Dr. Eris Thorne and Dr. Evelyn Vance, elite forensic psychiatrists who frequently testified in federal competency hearings. Directly behind them stood three men in sharp, unassuming dark suits. They did not look like private security guards. They possessed the cold, hyper-observant posture of federal agents because that is exactly what they were. The ballroom plunged into a dead, suffocating silence. 300 elite guests froze with their crystal flutes suspended in mid-air. At the head table, my mother dropped her glass entirely. It shattered against the polished marble floor, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy tension like a knife. Jamal recovered from his shock first, his face flushed with pure, unadulterated panic. He scrambled away from his seat next to the billionaire, nearly tripping over the edge of the stage as he rushed down the center aisle to intercept me. "What on earth are you doing?" Jamal hissed, stepping directly into my path. He tried to use his physical size to block the guests from seeing me. "I told security to keep you out of this building. You are not on the guest list. Turn around right now and leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." I did not even break my stride. I kept walking forward, forcing my brother to take hasty, awkward steps backward to avoid a collision. "I am not here to eat the overpriced salmon, Jamal," I replied, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "And you cannot arrest someone for crashing a party when they are accompanied by the United States Department of Justice." One of the federal agents behind me stepped forward just an inch. He subtly opened his tailored jacket, revealing a gold federal badge clipped to his belt. Jamal darted his eyes downward, saw the crest, and all the blood drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He backed away entirely, stumbling into an empty chair at a nearby table. I continued my march down the center aisle until I stood directly in front of the head table. My father sat in his wheelchair. His eyes were fully alert now. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The mild sedative Jamal had forced on him had completely worn off exactly as we had planned. Charles Sterling was turning a deep shade of purple with rage. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, and I had just shattered his perfect public relations moment in front of his most important investors. He slammed his heavy fist down on the table, rattling the expensive silverware and making his daughter jump. "Who do you think you are?" Sterling roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You do not just barge into a private, exclusive event and threaten my son-in-law. You are disturbing my daughter's family party. Get out of this room immediately, or I will personally see to it that you are dragged out in handcuffs." I looked at the billionaire developer. He was so incredibly confident in his wealth, so deeply accustomed to bending the entire world to his will. He truly believed his money made him invincible. "This is not your daughter's family, Mr. Sterling," I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear authority. "Your daughter is a parasite who married into my family solely to orchestrate a fraudulent real estate acquisition on your behalf." The crowd gasped in unison. Wealthy investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. City council members started whispering frantically to their aides. Beatrice stood up, her emerald green gown shaking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "Nia, stop this right now," my mother shrieked, desperate to preserve her crumbling illusion of high society acceptance. "You are ruining everything. You are making us look like fools. Apologize to Mr. Sterling immediately and get out of my sight." I did not look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Chloe. She was sitting rigidly next to my father, her face a mask of perfectly constructed, fragile innocence. She was already preparing to cry, already summoning the weaponized tears she believed would always save her from accountability. I think it is time we show all your distinguished guests exactly how the Sterling family conducts business, I said. I raised my phone in my right hand. I did not yell. I did not argue with them any further. I simply pressed a single button on my screen. High above the head table, the massive 20-foot projector screen had been displaying a beautifully curated slideshow of my parents over the last 40 years. The image of them cutting a wedding cake flickered and vanished. The screen went completely black for a fraction of a second. Then, brilliant white light flooded the room. The high-definition display lit up with massive, blown-up screenshots of a group text chat titled The Sterling Girls. The font was gigantic. There was absolutely no way anyone in the back of the room could miss it. 300 pairs of eyes instantly darted upward to read the messages Chloe had sent to her wealthy white friends at 2 in the morning on the exact night she battered my father. The entire ballroom read the words in stunned, horrified silence. We have to throw this senile old black man in an asylum tonight, so Jamal and I can finally liquidate that dirt patch on Auburn Avenue. Let him try to fight back. If he does not sign the deed tonight, I will just turn on the waterworks. The police in the South will always believe a terrified, crying white woman over a big, angry black guy. The words hung over the room like a nuclear detonation. The absolute undeniable proof of racial manipulation, premeditated medical fraud, and physical assault was glaring down at every politician, every real estate mogul, and every socialite who had just raised their glass to toast Chloe. The grand ballroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. The heavy, sophisticated silence that had defined the evening shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. City council members and state senators practically leaped out of their velvet chairs, desperate to put physical distance between themselves and the head table. In the world of high society and politics, proximity to a scandal of this magnitude was career suicide. I watched as men in expensive tuxedos aggressively whispered to their wives, grabbing their coats and heading straight for the exits. At a prime table near the front, the very women Chloe had texted were imploding. The so-called Sterling girls stared up at the massive projection screen, their faces burning a violently bright shade of crimson. They were not embarrassed because the text was racist. They were humiliated because they had been publicly exposed for entertaining it. When Chloe looked down from the head table, her eyes wide and pleading for her friends to defend her, they did not even hesitate. One of them grabbed her designer clutch, refused to make eye contact, and power walked out of the ballroom. The others immediately followed suit, leaving their half-full champagne flutes sitting on the pristine white tablecloths. They abandoned her the second her privilege became a liability. Chloe realized she was losing her audience. She defaulted to the only weapon she had ever known. She dropped to her knees right there on the polished hardwood stage, burying her face in her hands, and let out a loud theatrical wail. I did not write that she shrieked, her voice echoing through the microphone that still sat on the podium. My phone was hacked. She is framing me. Somebody help me, please. She looked up, letting tears stream down her perfectly contoured face, waiting for a wealthy white man or a sympathetic police officer to rush to her aid. But no one moved. The presence of the 3 federal agents standing stoically behind me completely neutralized her performance. The crowd recognized the cold, undeniable weight of federal authority. They knew those text messages were obtained through a legal warrant, not a petty family hacking scheme. Chloe sobbed louder, grabbing the hem of her father's suit jacket, but Charles Sterling violently yanked his leg away. He glared at his daughter with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She had just broadcast a massive racist conspiracy to defraud an elderly black man right in front of the people Charles Sterling needed to fund his next development project. She was no longer his precious daughter. She was a massive public relations disaster. Meanwhile, my mother was completely losing her mind. Beatrice scrambled away from my father's wheelchair, her emerald green gown tangling around her ankles as she sprinted toward the audio-visual control table in the corner of the room. "Turn it off!" she screamed at the terrified hotel technician. "Turn that screen off right now! Do you know who we are? Turn it off!" She started grabbing random cables and ripping them out of the soundboard, her flawless updo falling into a messy, frantic tangle around her face. But the projection screen remained brightly lit. My private intelligence team had locked the feed directly into the hotel's secure network. Beatrice could rip out every wire in that ballroom, and those damning words would still shine down on her ruined society debut. Jamal could not handle the collapse of his empire. The golden child who had spent his entire life being worshipped and protected by our mother completely snapped. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar as he jumped down from the elevated stage. He marched toward me, his fists clenched, his breathing heavy and erratic. "You are spreading fake news," Jamal bellowed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You manufactured this whole thing. This is a deep fake. You have always been jealous of me, Nia. You have always been bitter because Mom and Dad knew I was the one who was going to make this family rich. You are trying to ruin my life because you could never find a husband of your own to pull you out of the gutter." I stood my ground, my hands resting calmly at my sides. The two leading forensic psychiatrists stepped slightly to my left and right, casually creating a barrier between me and my out-of-control brother. Jamal realized he could not physically intimidate me, so he pivoted to the only thing he thought he still controlled: his stolen wealth. "It does not even matter what you put on that screen," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with desperate, arrogant delusion. The crowd murmured, watching him dig his own grave deeper with every word. "My power of attorney is completely real. The doctors signed off on it. Dad is legally incompetent, and I am the sole executor of his estate. I had the absolute legal right to sell that Auburn Avenue dirt to my father-in-law. The transaction is done. The money is in my account. You cannot undo a finalized real estate deal just because you threw a temper tantrum with a projector." Jamal turned to the crowd, opening his arms wide, trying to rally the remaining investors to his side. "It is perfectly legal business," he declared, sweat pouring down his forehead. "I secured a lucrative deal for a blighted property. I am bringing millions of dollars of development into this city. This is just a disgruntled sibling trying to contest a legitimate sale." The sheer audacity of his defense was breathtaking. He was standing in front of 300 people, publicly admitting that he had institutionalized our father just to facilitate a real estate transaction, and he actually believed the wealthy elite in the room would applaud his business acumen. He truly thought that if he acted ruthless enough, Charles Sterling and his billionaire friends would welcome him into their club. But Charles Sterling was not looking at Jamal with respect. He was looking at him like a liability that needed to be eradicated. I did not shout back at my brother. I did not engage in a screaming match from the floor. I walked forward, my heels echoing sharply against the marble. The 3 federal agents parted the crowd for me, ensuring no one, not even the hotel security, dared to intervene. I climbed the short staircase to the elevated head table. I walked right past Charles Sterling, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. I walked past Chloe, who was still huddled on the floor, her fake tears drying up as she realized she was completely on her own. I walked past my father, giving his shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze. I stepped up to the wooden podium and pulled the microphone from its stand. The feedback whined for a fraction of a second before settling into a crisp, clear hum. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Even Beatrice stopped tearing at the audio cables, turning around to stare at me with wide, terrified eyes. I looked down from the stage, locking my gaze directly onto my brother. He was standing in the middle of the dance floor, chest heaving, waiting for me to admit defeat against his precious legal documents. "Are you sure about that, Jamal?" I asked, my voice projecting smoothly and flawlessly through the massive ballroom speakers. "Are you absolutely sure you sold the land to Mr. Sterling?" Jamal scoffed, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. His laugh echoed through the silent ballroom, a harsh, grating sound of pure, arrogant denial. "I have the deed right here in my jacket, Nia. It is signed, filed, and processed by the county clerk. You cannot just unsell commercial real estate because you brought a projector and some feds to a dinner party." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The microphone caught every quiet, lethal syllable I spoke. "You have a piece of paper, Jamal. That is true. But the fundamental problem with selling a piece of property is that you actually have to own it first. I unclasped the brass lock on my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I held the packet up high under the bright ballroom chandeliers. At the top of the first page rested a massive raised red seal from the Federal Court of the Northern District of Georgia. 5 years ago, I began my voice ringing out over the hundreds of guests holding their breath. Our father noticed a severe discrepancy in his retirement accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been quietly siphoned away over a period of 18 months. He traced the missing funds. Do you want to know what he found, Beatrice? I looked directly at my mother. She had frozen perfectly still next to the shattered audio-visual equipment. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her ashen and trembling. He found out that his own wife had been forging his signature on withdrawal slips. I continued, making sure every wealthy investor in the room heard the absolute truth about her pristine high society facade. She was draining his life savings to secretly fund her golden boy's first failed startup company. Jamal opened his mouth to object, but I cut him off immediately. Dad could have sent you both to prison right then and there. But he was a pastor. He believed in grace. He believed in protecting his family from public ruin. So he kept his mouth shut. He absorbed the ultimate betrayal. But he also made a crucial decision that day. He realized his son and his wife were financial predators just waiting for him to die. I turned my gaze to Charles Sterling. The billionaire developer was gripping his crystal champagne flute so tightly the stem looked ready to snap. He was a shark, and he was finally smelling the blood in the water. But the blood was not mine. To protect the legacy of his ancestors, my father hired a federal estate attorney. I explained, projecting absolute, unwavering authority. He transferred the entire historic Auburn Avenue estate, every single brick, every single acre, into a blind, irrevocable trust. The land ceased to be his personal property half a decade ago. It belongs entirely to the Marcus Heritage Trust. I slapped the federal documents down onto the wooden podium. The sharp smack made Chloe flinch in her seat. And the sole trustee, the only human being on this earth, with the legal authority to sell, lease, or transfer that land, is me. The collective gasp from the ballroom was deafening. The realization slammed into the crowd like a tidal wave. I was not just a disgruntled sister crashing a family party. I was the absolute owner of the $15 million empire they had all gathered to celebrate stealing. Your medical power of attorney only gave you control over Jeremiah Marcus's personal assets, I told my brother, watching his arrogant posture completely collapse. But Jeremiah Marcus has not owned that land in 5 years. You forged a medical document. You drugged your father. You allowed your wife to physically batter him. And you did it all to sign a quitclaim deed that is legally worth less than the napkins on these dinner tables. Jamal stumbled backward. He bumped into a chair, knocking over a silver candlestick. He looked at the documents on my podium, then looked at his hands as if they no longer belonged to him. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. No, the county clerk processed it. The system accepted the deed. The system accepts whatever paperwork is filed until the true title holder flags it for fraud. I corrected him sharply. I flagged it the second you walked out of the hospital. The sale is void. The land remains exactly where it belongs. I turned my attention fully to Charles Sterling. The billionaire's face had turned an explosive shade of violet. His chest heaved beneath his tailored tuxedo. He did not care about the assault on my father. He did not care about the blatant racism his daughter displayed on the screen above us. He only cared about one thing: his money. Mr. Sterling, I said, addressing him with mocking politeness, you pride yourself on being a ruthless businessman. You surround yourself with high-priced corporate lawyers. Yet you let your entitlement blind you to basic due diligence. You wanted to steal Black-owned land so badly that you rushed a multi-million-dollar transaction in the middle of the night without running a deep title search. You trusted a desperate broke man who was playing dress-up in a rented suit. Sterling stood up so fast his heavy chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. He did not look at me. He turned his terrifying, predatory glare directly onto my brother. Jamal Sterling growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent shivers down the spines of the guests sitting nearby. I wired a $2 million non-refundable deposit into your holding account to secure that deed. Where is my money? Jamal looked like he was about to pass out. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, suffocated squeak came out. He looked at Chloe, desperate for his white wife to save him from her father's wrath. But Chloe was pressing herself as far back into her chair as possible, physically recoiling from the man she had just conspired with. "He does not have your money," Charles Burst announced, delivering the final devastating blow. "Jamal's software company has been completely bankrupt for 2 years. He has been dodging creditors and hiding from the IRS. The second your $2 million deposit hit his account yesterday, the automated debt collectors drained 40% of it just to cover his outstanding commercial loans." I stepped out from behind the podium, walking down the short stairs to stand on the main floor, closing the distance between me and my ruined brother. "And the rest of it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at Jamal. "Well, he bought a $40,000 platinum Rolex watch to wear tonight. He paid off the lease on his imported sports car. And he wired a very generous $200,000 hush payment to an apartment complex in downtown Atlanta. An apartment complex currently occupied by a 22-year-old fitness instructor who has been keeping him very busy while Chloe was busy picking out new curtains." Chloe's head snapped up. Her fake tears were entirely gone, replaced by genuine, unadulterated shock. "You are sleeping with someone else," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the ballroom. "You stole my father's money to pay off a mistress." Jamal held his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Chloe, baby, listen to me. I can explain. She means nothing to me." "Shut up!" Charles Sterling roared, his voice thunderous. The billionaire marched around the table, grabbing Jamal roughly by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo. "I do not give a damn about your miserable marriage. I want my $2 million back right now, you pathetic fraud. I do not have it." Jamal sobbed, completely breaking down in front of 300 of the city's most elite residents. "The bank took it. I spent it. Please, Mr. Sterling, I can work it off. I can make it up to you." Charles Sterling shoved Jamal backward with such massive force that my brother crashed to his knees on the hardwood floor. The billionaire looked down at the man he had been calling his son-in-law just 20 minutes ago with a look of absolute lethal disgust. Charles Sterling stood towering over my brother, his chest heaving with rage. "You are nothing but a con artist." Sterling spat, his voice vibrating with pure venom. "I gave you that deposit because you promised me the keys to the kingdom. You told me you had the Marcus family wrapped around your finger. Instead, you are a broke, pathetic beggar playing dress-up with my money. I will have my lawyers tie you up in litigation for the rest of your natural life. You will not even be able to afford the cardboard box you sleep in." I watched my brother scramble backward on the polished hardwood floor, his expensive tuxedo jacket bunched up around his shoulders. He looked wildly around the room, begging for someone, anyone, to come to his defense. He looked at Beatrice, but our mother was frozen in terror, her hands covering her mouth as she watched her golden ticket to high society evaporate into thin air. He looked at Chloe, but his white wife had already turned her back, aggressively texting on her phone, undoubtedly contacting her own high-priced divorce attorneys. Finally, Jamal looked at me. His eyes were wide and frantic. "Nia," he choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Nia, please. You have to help me. If he sues me, I am ruined. The bank already took everything. You have the trust fund. You control the Auburn Avenue estate. Just lease him a piece of it. Just give him something so he backs off. We are family. You have to save me, too." I looked down at the man who had stood in a police precinct just days ago and allowed his wife to weaponize her white tears against our black father. I looked at the man who had bribed a corrupt doctor to declare his own flesh and blood legally incompetent just to steal a piece of generational wealth. "Save you," I repeated, letting the word echo through the silent ballroom. "The way you saved Dad when Chloe was swinging a baseball bat at his head. The way you saved me when Mom kicked me out of the house for choosing a state college over your prestigious private university because she decided she could only afford to pay one tuition." Jamal flinched, but I did not stop. I took another step down the stairs, towering over him just as Sterling had done. "You have spent your entire life believing you are the smartest person in the room, Jamal. You thought because you wore a tailored suit and learned how to code switch for wealthy white investors, you were untouchable. You thought your proximity to their whiteness made you one of them. But you are not a businessman. You are a terrible liability. And the funniest part is, I did not even have to lift a finger to destroy your company. You did that all by yourself. I walked over to the wooden podium and picked up a second sleek black folder. I casually flipped it open. "Let us take a trip down memory lane," I said, addressing not just Jamal, but the entire room of silent, captivated guests. 3 years ago, your highly publicized tech startup was on the brink of total collapse. You had burned through your initial seed money, throwing lavish parties and buying luxury cars you could not afford to impress your new in-laws. You were exactly 2 weeks away from declaring bankruptcy. But then a miracle happened, did it not? Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the folder in my hands. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. A private equity firm stepped in. I continued my voice, perfectly steady and lethal. An anonymous investment group offered you a $2 million bailout package. It was your saving grace. It kept your doors open just long enough for you to marry Chloe and trick the Sterling family into believing you were a wealthy tech mogul instead of a failing fraud. Charles Sterling snapped his head toward me, his eyes narrowing as he realized the true depth of the deception he had bought into. "But that bailout money came with incredibly strict conditions," I said, pulling a heavily notarized contract from the folder. "The anonymous investors required a blanket lien on your entire life. You signed a contract stating that if you ever defaulted on your commercial loans, this private equity firm would immediately seize all of your personal and professional assets. Your bank accounts, your vehicles, any future inheritance, and every single dime of revenue you ever generated. You signed your entire financial existence away because you were too proud to admit you were a failure." Jamal was shaking violently now. He pushed himself up onto his knees, his hands trembling as he reached out toward me. "What does that have to do with anything?" he pleaded, his voice high and desperate. "The firm has not called in the debt. I can negotiate with them. I just need time to figure this out." "You are out of time," I said, my voice dropping to a low, devastating whisper. "Because you defaulted on 3 separate commercial loans last week. Which means the anonymous investment group has officially executed the lien. They seized the $2 million deposit Mr. Sterling wired you yesterday. They seized the funds you tried to wire to your mistress in downtown Atlanta this morning. They own the clothes on your back." "Who is it?" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Who owns the firm? I will call them right now. I can make a deal." I took one final step forward, standing so close I could see the desperate tears welling in my brother's eyes. I looked him dead in the face and delivered the kill shot. "The private equity firm is called NM Holdings," I stated clearly, letting every single syllable land with absolute precision. "NM, Nia Marcus." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Jamal stopped breathing. His eyes widened to an impossible size as the realization crashed into his brain with the force of a runaway freight train. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, looking like a fish suffocating on dry land. "You..." He finally gasped the word, barely a breath. "Me," I confirmed, smiling a cold, ruthless smile. "I was the anonymous investor Jamal. While you were busy playing a big shot, and Mom was busy telling all her high society friends that I was a bitter, broke civil rights lawyer, I was quietly building my own fortune. I took the massive settlements I won from suing corrupt police departments and racist corporations, and I invested them. I built an empire in the shadows while you were busy faking one in the spotlight. I own your debt. I own your fake company. I own you." Jamal let out a guttural, agonizing sound. It was the sound of a man watching his entire fabricated reality burn to ash. He collapsed forward, his hands slapping against the hardwood floor, his head bowed in absolute crushing defeat. He had spent his whole life looking down on me, treating me like an annoying, inferior obstacle, only to discover that I had been holding his leash the entire time. Beatrice finally broke out of her paralysis. She let out a piercing, horrified shriek and scrambled down from the head table. She practically threw herself onto the floor next to her ruined golden boy. "Nia, how could you do this?" She wailed, her emerald gown pooling around her knees as she wrapped her arms around Jamal. "He is your brother. You tricked him. You set him up to fail. You are a monster." "I did not set him up to do anything, Mom," I replied, my voice echoing with unyielding authority. "I gave him $2 million to build something real. He chose to squander it on a fake lifestyle. He chose to defraud his father-in-law. And he chose to try and institutionalize his own black father just to steal a piece of land to cover his debts to a white family. He built his own gallows. I just handed him the rope." Charles Sterling let out a harsh, barking laugh. He looked at Jamal groveling on the floor, then looked at me with a grudging, terrified respect. "You are a ruthless woman," Ms. Marcus the billionaire muttered, adjusting his tailored tuxedo jacket. "But if you own his debt and you seized my $2 million deposit, I expect that money wired back into my account by Monday morning." I turned my sharp gaze onto the real estate tycoon. "You will not be getting a single dime back, Mr. Sterling," I informed him cheerfully. "Your $2 million was seized as a penalty for the emotional distress and medical trauma inflicted upon my father during an attempted robbery orchestrated by your entitled daughter. Consider it a heavily discounted settlement out of court. If you try to sue me for it, I will release the text messages currently projected on that screen to every major news outlet in the country. Your company's stock will plummet, and you will be federally investigated for attempting to aggressively gentrify a historic black neighborhood through fraudulent and racist means." Sterling opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer undeniable threat in my eyes silenced him completely. He knew he was beaten. He spun around, grabbed Chloe by the arm, and aggressively hauled her toward the exit, abandoning the Marcus family entirely. My mother sat on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as she cradled Jamal's head. "It is over," she cried, rocking him back and forth. "Just let it be over, Nia. You took everything. Are you happy now? Are you finally satisfied?" I looked down at the two people who had made my life a living nightmare, who had treated my father like disposable trash just for a taste of elite approval. "I am not quite finished yet," I said, taking a deliberate step back. "Because financial ruin is just the civil penalty." I turned my head slightly, giving a firm, silent nod to the three men standing in the shadows near the entrance of the ballroom. The three federal agents stepped forward in perfect unison. The distinct, terrifying sound of heavy metal unlatching echoed across the silent room as they pulled their steel handcuffs from their belts. The lead agent, a tall man with a remarkably calm demeanor, stepped directly past me and grabbed Jamal by the shoulder. He hauled my brother up from the hardwood floor with zero hesitation. Jamal Marcus, the agent, stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, extortion, and the financial exploitation of an elderly adult. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use, considering you just confessed to a ballroom full of witnesses." Jamal thrashed against the agent's grip, his expensive tuxedo tearing at the shoulder seam. He looked wildly around the room, the reality of federal prison finally breaking through his arrogant delusion. "Mom," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "Mom, do something. Call a lawyer. Tell them I did not mean it." But Beatrice was entirely paralyzed. She sat on the marble floor, her hands hovering in the air as she watched the cold steel cuffs snap shut around the wrists of her precious golden child. The elite society she had worshipped her entire life was now watching her son being processed like a common criminal. The second agent did not miss a beat. He bypassed the weeping mess of my brother and walked straight toward the head table. Chloe saw him coming. The color drained from her face, leaving her a ghostly white. She instantly defaulted to her ultimate weapon. She dropped to the floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and began to sob violently, hyperventilating as she tried to summon the same fragile victim persona that had worked so flawlessly at the police precinct. "Please," Chloe wailed, looking up at the federal agent through a cascade of blonde hair and tears. "I did not do anything. He forced me. Jamal made me do it. I was so scared of him. Daddy, please help me. They are trying to hurt me." The federal agent did not flinch. He did not offer her a cup of water. He did not offer her a blanket. He simply reached down, grabbed her by the wrist, and hauled her to her feet with clinical precision. Chloe Sterling, the agent announced, completely immune to her frantic weeping. You are under arrest for perjury, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Chloe thrashed wildly, her sheer silver dress snagging on the edge of a chair. Daddy, she shrieked, reaching her hand out toward Charles Sterling. Do not let them take me. Tell them who you are. Tell them to stop. Charles Sterling stood perfectly still. He looked at his daughter, the daughter who had just publicly humiliated him, defrauded his company, and dragged his billionaire name into a federal civil rights conspiracy. He adjusted his silk tie and took a very deliberate step backward, creating a massive physical distance between himself and the crime scene. You are on your own, Chloe Sterling said, his voice dropping into a glacial, unforgiving tone. I will not have federal agents looking into my development firm because you were too stupid to cover your tracks. Do not call my lawyers. I am officially cutting you off. Chloe stopped crying. The manufactured tears dried up instantly as the absolute finality of her father's words struck her. She was not a Sterling anymore. She was a liability. The agent snapped the cuffs around her wrists, her diamond bracelets clinking against the cheap metal. Beatrice finally found her voice. It was a guttural, agonizing sound that ripped from her throat as she scrambled across the floor, clutching at the legs of the federal agents. You cannot take him, Beatrice sobbed. Her emerald gown ruined, her perfect updo completely destroyed. He is a good boy. He is going to be a millionaire. He is my son. Nia, please, she begged, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. Please, I am your mother. Call them off. Give him the land. Give him whatever he wants. I looked down at the woman who had slapped me in a hospital corridor, the woman who had called me a ghetto embarrassment just days prior. You made your choice, Beatrice, I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. You wanted to sit at the table with wolves. Now you get to watch them eat. As the agents began to drag Jamal and Chloe toward the grand double doors, a sudden heavy movement at the head table caught everyone's attention. The private nurse had stepped away, horrified by the arrests. The wheelchair sat isolated in the center of the stage. Jeremiah Marcus, the man they had drugged, battered, and paraded around as a senile prop, reached down to the armrests of his chair. He unbuckled the safety strap draped across his waist. He placed his polished leather shoes firmly on the hardwood stage, and then my father stood up. He did not wobble. He did not slump. He stood at his full height of 6'2", straightening his tailored tuxedo jacket with absolute terrifying dignity. The entire ballroom gasped. Beatrice stopped screaming, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. Jamal, halfway to the door in handcuffs, froze in his tracks, his jaw hitting the floor. My father looked down at his wife and his son. The white bandage on his forehead throbbed with the pain of 12 fresh stitches, but his eyes burned with the brilliant, unyielding clarity of a patriarch who had just executed a flawless checkmate. I was never losing my mind, Jamal, my father said, his rich baritone voice carrying perfectly across the silent room. I endured the blow to my head. I swallowed that mild sedative tonight. I let you wheel me into this room like a broken old fool. I did it because Nia told me that if I played my part, you would get greedy enough to confess everything on a silver platter. And you did exactly what we knew you would do. Jamal let out a pathetic, suffocated whimper. He looked from our father to me, finally realizing the sheer magnitude of the trap we had built around him. He had never been the predator. He had been the prey from the very first second. You broke my heart, son. My father continued, his voice heavy with finality. But you will never break my legacy. The federal agents did not give Jamal another moment to speak. They yanked him forward, dragging him and his weeping white wife out of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind them. The elite guests were already scrambling for the exits, practically running over each other to escape the fallout. Charles Sterling vanished into the crowd, rushing back to whatever corporate bunker he crawled out of. Beatrice remained on the floor, weeping into her hands, completely shattered by the realization that her golden child was going to a federal penitentiary and her high society dreams were dead and buried. I did not look at her again. I walked up the short stairs to the stage, stopping right beside my father. He reached out and pulled me into a tight, warm embrace. He kissed the top of my head, holding me with the kind of pride and fierce protection I had fought my entire life to secure. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "You did it, Nia," he corrected gently, pulling back to look at me with absolute admiration. "You saved our history." I waited until my father was safely escorted out the side entrance by my private security team, ensuring he was taken straight home to rest. The grand ballroom was completely empty now, save for the shattered glass on the floor and the discarded champagne flutes sitting on pristine white tablecloths. I walked over to the nearest table. I picked up a perfectly untouched crystal glass of red wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich, bold flavor settle on my tongue. The silence in the room was beautiful. It was the sound of a slate being wiped completely clean. I turned my body looking directly into the camera lens as it slowly began to pull back, widening the frame to capture the ruined luxury of the ballroom around me. I smiled a genuine, powerful smile of a woman who had just rewritten the rules of the game. They called me the throwaway daughter, I said, my voice smooth, confident, and completely unapologetic. But today, I am the only one holding the gavel of justice in this family. And trust me, the sound of that gavel is sweeter than any tear.